We're in a supertanker heading towards an iceberg. Unless you start changing direction quickly, you hit that iceberg. And the iceberg is not pretty. You know, my 35 years in Africa, I've seen what food insecurity does. It's not just people get hungry, it's people fight. You know, when you haven't got enough food, you fight and everything breaks down.
Steve Collins is a medical doctor with a doctorate in nutrition who has spent the last 35 years fighting malnutrition and starvation in the developing world. And he is my special guest on this episode of Food Done Right. Hi, I'm Mick Kelly, the founder of GIY, and this is Season 2 of our podcast series Food Done Right, which was recorded at the Harvest Festival in Waterford City. On this episode, Barry Flynn meets Dr. Steve Collins, one of the great social change leaders in Ireland and a globally renowned expert in nutrition. They discuss how events happening around the globe like coronavirus and the war in Ukraine are affecting food insecurity in Ireland and the Western world. The complexities between the World Health Organization, the Irish government and the dairy farmer, Steve's experience as an innovative farmer of Aronia Berries and the health benefits that they can deliver, and his work around improving food security by diversifying local agriculture. Before we get into this episode, I've got two asks for you. First of all, please do follow us on Apple or Spotify, which really helps us to spread the word about this podcast. And secondly, I have a new TV series on RTE called Food Matters. You can check it out on RTE1 or the RTE player, or go to the website www.foodmatterstv.ie, where you can watch full episodes and loads more information as well. Now let's get into Barry and Steve's conversation. They start by talking about global hunger and nutrition levels. Having worked in this area for decades, Steve has witnessed a lot of progress made in the area of malnutrition in the developing world, but unfortunately, he's also seen a reversing of that progress in recent years, and global hunger levels are starting to rise again. So Barry started by asking Steve his view on why this has been happening.
I think there's a constellation of causes. There's the long-term, profound, overriding effect of climate change, making marginal agriculture I speak primarily about Africa because that's where I know most, making it more difficult, making large areas less productive. So there's that backdrop. And then there's also this centralisation of the food production and massive sort of dependence on a very few companies to transport food around the world. And so then you have these short-term shocks from the COVID pandemic, for example, where supply chains broke in Africa, and that caused a massive increase in malnutrition and hunger, and you know the numbers of acutely malnourished, the children you would normally see on the TV as starving, has gone up. I think the data is about 30%. And then you've got the more recent war, which again, many countries, in fact most countries, are dependent on import of staple foods. You know, particularly North Africa on Ukrainian wheat. That's obviously ended or as good as ended with the war, and so that's compounded on the underlying trend of less productivity locally, COVID fracturing supply chains, and then the war again stopping supply. And so it's a sort of a really bad situation now, and getting worse.
Yeah, and I think all of those factors, you know, in Ireland, I think we have a sense of them. We saw some disruption to food in you know, when the pandemic broke out briefly a little bit. Like right now, if I go to a supermarket, there's a cap on the amount of vegetable oil I can buy. You know, it's limited at 3 in one supermarket locally. You know, so you have this sort of sense, there is something happening, and then but we still forget that for people in you know, all across Africa, basically, you know, those issues that's where they're felt. You know, they're felt at the moment the most sort of delicate level here in Ireland, whereas it's so chronic elsewhere. And I don't think we really fully appreciate that, or we lose sight of that.
Yeah, well, we've got more resilience here. You know, that it's easier to produce food here. We've got a greater food production industry, but in my opinion, and what I'm seeing is these problems of food insecurity are coming towards us. You know, there's been reports now for several years that Europe is not going to be able to distance itself from food insecurity in the future with climate change, and that was without factoring all these short-term problems. And, the war in Ukraine, essentially it's a climate war. It's like the wars I've been dealing with in Africa for the last 30 years. It's about resources, food resources becoming more scarce and people fighting over them. I'm sure there's other reasons as well, but certainly it's no coincidence that Ukraine and Russia are some of the biggest grain producers, biggest fertilizer producers and exporters. It's the productive heartland of Ukraine that's being fought over. And that's starting to, like you say, rationing of oil. This is coming towards us. And I think it's a long, slow process to change agricultural practices. And you can't suddenly flip from a system dependent on agrochemicals and pesticides and very intensive to a more sustainable, lower input organic system that's more environmentally sustainable. You can't suddenly flip to that. And we're seeing that in Sri Lanka now. The government just sort of suddenly said, we're going to go organic, we're going to phase out subsidies, we're going to phase out fertilizer use. And they've created a huge problem in the short term. And so the sooner, I think, people here wake up to the fact that this is happening, it's not, this summer, people can't see that the heat that was in Europe, is not normal. And the sooner they actually start to bring about some of these changes and gradually change, the better, because if we wait too long and we resist it too long, the adjustment will be more and more painful.
Just going back to the work that you've done with Valid over the years, the intervention that you sort of pioneered was ready-to-use therapeutic foods, and so I was doing my research before chatting, Stephen. In a recent article, it spoke to the UN rule around having 50% of protein coming from dairy, and you've been kind of a one-man advocate, as you just described, to advocate for plant-based options, which are cheaper, have a kind of a wider array of health benefits, but they're blocked by this sort of big kind of machine, I suppose. And I know that much of your career has been spent trying to navigate those multilateral institutions and the bureaucracies within it. And it seems like obviously there's many avenues for change, but the big institutions are obviously a key pillar of this. And you've been going up against them, trying to bring different solutions out there. Is there anything that you've learned over those years that makes you feel like you can get into these bureaucracies, these big, these sort of slow-moving super tankers, and start to turn them around? What makes that happen?
Yeah, that's a good question. Had you asked me 5-6 years ago, I would have said data. I'd say that ultimately you can influence policy choice at a UN national or global level if you've got the right data. And that's what we did when we developed this whole system of treating malnutrition in people's homes. It was hugely opposed by the UN, the NGOs, because it was taking very sick children who used to die, say 30% of them used to die in hospital, and it was actually saying, no, look, we don't need doctors and nurses, we can treat them in the community using mothers as the primary caregiver. Very, very unpopular at the time, but we got the data to show that not only could we reduce mortality rates, but we could hugely expand access to these programs because they were much lower cost. And let's say those are the programs that were using the ready-to-use therapeutic food. So in the early noughties, we had huge success with data. But more recently, I don't know about that. As you say about the pioneering the ready-to-use therapeutic food, which are these sort of small, very nutrient-dense, it's 500 kilocalories in a small pack that the child can eat to treat their starvation. They can control their intake themselves. And at the moment, they're all milk-based, and milk isn't produced, or milk powder that you use in making them isn't produced in sub-Saharan Africa. So it's all imported, and that increased costs. It means you're vulnerable to supply line fracture, and it means it's disempowering to local agriculture. So right from 2003, we started researching plant-based alternatives, and a lot of research, and we had very bright people working on this. Irish government money, so Irish taxpayers funded this. And after 14 years of massive different trials at the level of looking at these products composition, doing a lot of programming in computers to get the right composition of the lowest cost from available ingredients, then stability tests, acceptability tests, and then big randomized controlled trials like drug trials to see if these things worked. And at the end of the process, after 14 years, we came up with a recipe based on plants. It was a soya maize sorghum recipe that we had to enhance with amino acids, so a tiny quantity of amino acids just to make it work. And we had a big randomized controlled trial in Malawi that showed not only did it work, but it worked better than the milk product, because without milk it actually promoted iron absorption and treated anemia much more effectively. And this is in a product that 96% of the ingredients could be grown, say, in Malawi, where we were testing it. And the cost was then, it was about 30% lower. Now, with the price of milk surging, it's more, greater cost reduction. And we had that data. And then we went to the WHO, and we had to push them to even review it. It took them 3 years to even review it. And then in the face of that data, they conducted a highly flawed review that basically they did what's called a meta-analysis. So they pulled data from different trials looking at plant-based. And there was only 6 trials, and 3 of them were ours. And the first 2 were on recipes we discarded because we knew they didn't work. We got the data, they didn't work. But what they did, they pulled all the data. So they pulled our 2 recipes that didn't work with the very different recipe that did work. And they came to the conclusion it didn't work. And then they didn't even commission the cost effectiveness study, even though the Irish government had actually paid for them to do it. And so they didn't even commission the area where they knew we would be much better. And they've blocked it. They've maintained this stipulation that these products must have milk in them. 50% of the protein must come from dairy, with no evidence to support that, and a lot of evidence showing that that's not needed. And so, and to give you the dimensions, if they moved to this recipe, you could treat over 1 million children more with no product cost, in a way that would empower local agriculture and make farmers more productive because they have markets for their goods, and improve local food manufacturing industry. And it's blocked. And despite this data, and no one's prepared to challenge them. We went to the Irish government, and they didn't want to rock the boat. They said, you've upset the WHO because you criticised them in public. And so now the answer of, data will save the day and change policy. I'm not sure. There's forces at play that are not amenable to rational argument, which is really frightening.
And the response to the data in that case was other data. It just depends what data is coming from where. And
they say you have lies, damn lies, and statistics.
Yeah. And I mean that's a problem that goes back into any research. It's all about who's paying for the research, this can all be manipulated depending on the interests of the people involved.
Yeah. And the research we did was through this charity Valid Nutrition that we started up in 2005. So it was all public sector. There was there's no shareholders, there's no dividends, and all profits are reinvested into the social cause. So there's no vested interest there.
Is that the crux of the matter? And when you bring it back to Ireland, because I was going to ask, do we have a better chance at making change happen within the Irish agricultural system because it's not as much of a behemoth as the UN or the WHO, or is that being too naive? Because at the end of the day, if they're a vested interest, that's the thing that's really hard to turn around. How do we, how does this actually play out? How do we solve these problems when we kind of know we know the solutions, we know what needs to happen? How do you actually start to kind of unwind those vested interests? How do you change the hearts and minds of the people involved? Is that possible?
Well, it has to be possible. I can't accept that we are going to fall off a cliff caused into malnutrition in Ireland. And I think there are changes, but the milk industry is big and it's strong. And even sort of government bodies like Chokeberry, they've been promoting milk for so long. They're having a huge difficulty in turning that round. The IFA, supposedly the IFA, who are meant to be leading farmers, the representative of farmers, they head in the sand. When this global report called the Eat Lancet report was published a couple of years ago, where you got world leading nutritionists teaming up with world leading climate experts and saying, what is a sustainable diet for the planet and a healthy diet for people? And they came to the conclusion it's a diet with very low meat and low dairy, primarily plant-based, lots of veg, lots of legumes, pulses, and grain, And the response of the IFA was, "Oh, that's corrupt. People have paid them off." And this is coming, and we see in the new cap, the new funding, that they're starting now to incentivise less intensive farming. They're starting to move the grants away from dairy and beef towards other forms of farming, which is incredibly welcome. But it's a 5-year process, and the new cap doesn't go nearly far enough, in my opinion. And we haven't got that long. We're in a supertanker heading towards an iceberg, and we need to change direction. But the supertanker's got so much inertia behind it that unless you start changing direction quickly, you hit that iceberg. And the iceberg is not pretty. My 35 years in Africa, I've seen what food insecurity does. And it's not just people get hungry, it's people fight. When you haven't got enough food, you fight. Everything breaks down. Law and order breaks down. And it's the poorest, it's the weakest that get the short end of the, shitty end of the stick.
Yeah. I suppose the opposite of a supertanker is maybe an individual or an entrepreneur, the freedom that comes with one person compared to a supertanker is really all of the people. It's herding everyone together at the same time, and it's really slow because you're trying to build consensus, and human beings are surprisingly not very good at that, even when our backs are up against the wall. But individuals can make things change. It starts to veer into slightly worrying idealistic territory if you start to put all the onus on individuals to change things. But for yourself, you have gone off and instigated the type of change that you think is not just important in the long run for the sustainability of Irish agriculture, but is also more profitable in the short term, more resilient to external shocks. Like, is the answer just to a kind of a groundswell of entrepreneurial farming, and how might that come about?
I think it's a dialectic between the two. I think you have to have individuals to innovate and to show proof of concept, to show that you can actually diversify agriculture in Ireland in an environmentally and climate sustainable way, and make it profitable and provide healthy food. So you've got to have those models which are essentially individual entrepreneurs or social entrepreneurs changing things. But then you've got to go to scale, and that requires policy. At the moment, the grants are still supporting, in my opinion, non-viable dairy and suckler beef industry. That has to stop, because however good your alternative model is, if it's up against a market that's biased because of grants and incentives, it's going to struggle. So there has to be a dialectic. The government has to be open enough to see, actually, that's an opportunity. That's change. That's producing healthy food from land that would otherwise be far lower production in an environmental sustainable way. We want to support that. And so they have to have policy to make that fertile, to allow that to grow. And so it has to be a dialectic between the two.
And could you describe your own farm and setup, and maybe tell us how it from my understanding, you're working against the system in terms of you're not getting grants to plant Aronia bushes and so on. You're doing that off your own bat. Is that more viable than being part of the non-viable system as is, and it just needs the grants and subsidies to scale up and become truly viable? So can the innovator farmer go against the grain, have a better immediate outcome, and then set up for a long-term even greater outcome? Or
I think in my experience the answer is a categorical yes. I think even though we're and there are some grants, there are organic improvement grants, farm improvement grants, there are some grants, and the new cap will actually help a lot in terms of their environment, so-called their value in environmental services. So things that you do on your farm that improve the environment, and then all the knock-on effects that has, increasing diversity of your grass swards, putting in hedgerows, putting in bird boxes, things like that, and protecting watercourses that have a good knock-on effect are now being incentivised. Not, in my opinion, not enough, but it's certainly started to happen. And so that's a help. But there's a huge demand, and a lesson from Africa, these changing people's dietary habits to, say, be more plant-based and healthier has to come from a demand. You can't just force people to change. You have to show them that actually this makes them feel better. And there is a huge opportunity that we're finding. Say we're growing blueberries, and we're growing Aronia berries. And the blueberries, once people taste them, they actually realise what a proper organic blueberry that's not just pushed with chemicals tastes like. You know, we can't sell a tenth of the demand. And so that's an opportunity for other farmers to actually look, wow, you know, this farmer up here can't meet demand. Let's do the same thing. So there's opportunity there. And then the Aronia berries, which are particularly exciting. They're the superest of superfoods, if that's English, which it probably isn't. But they have these compounds called polyphenols in them, which are the more research, and there's a lot of research going on that's done on these. They show they're absolutely fundamental to metabolic health. And there's 3 things they do that we all need. For me as a nutritionist, the first is they lower blood glucose. After you eat a carbohydrate meal, your blood glucose spikes. And if it goes too high or it stays too high, that is what starts to lead to a condition called metabolic syndrome, which is diabetes or pre-diabetes, where you can't control blood sugar because you have insulin resistance. That comes with central obesity, and you look around you, sadly now, you know, there's a lot of adults in Ireland with central obesity. It also comes with deranged blood fats, you know, your high levels of bad cholesterol, low levels of good cholesterol, and then it comes with high blood pressure. And 30% of adults in Ireland are suffering from that. And that is a really serious complaint. And these Aronia berries, there's really good clinical data, controlled trial data showing that they dramatically lower blood glucose. Even a small 100 ml of this juice lowers blood glucose by over 60% after a carbohydrate meal. And there's good papers on that. And so you've got a food that they're growing brilliantly on the mountainside in Ireland, high up, 220 metres high, full view of the Atlantic, in the worst possible soil's too good a name for it. It's like a grey, rocky clay. And these things are growing brilliantly up there. And so you're producing a juice, and then actually you can make powders out of the press cake that's left over from the juice. Very, very high. It's the highest level of polyphenols of any fruit or veg. And so these have a huge health benefit, and they grow on the most marginal soil in Ireland. So I think I'm hopeful. I think we've got proof of concept on the farm. We've been growing these for 3-4 years, and now we're getting much higher. You know, our economic returns per acre of land they're on, this high rough mountain acre, have gone up probably 100-fold than if we'd been growing sheep on there. And so there's a massive economic return. They're perennial bushes, deep roots. They're creating soil. Once roots go down to the subsoil, into this clay, then fungi follow, then bacteria follow, then protozoa follow, and you start to generate life. And you're trapping carbon down there as well. So you're improving the soil, and you're providing cover. You're stopping erosion. You're providing a habitat for animals. So it's a win-win all round. So I think, you know, I would hope that we'll see a lot more of these berries.
Mm. So I've never heard of Aronia berries, I wonder how many of your customers have. Or, you know, well,
it's worse than that. Their old name in America, they call them chokeberries. Unfortunately, yeah, it's not a great marketing, But why they call them chokeberries is because the polyphenols are very astringent. And they're very low glucose, they're very low sugar, and very quite astringent. So it's not a juice you glug back like orange juice. You just take 100 ml to stabilise your metabolic health. But we're getting incredible feedback. I've teamed up with a guy called Paul Murphy. He used to actually manage Unilever Ireland. He was managing director of Unilever Ireland for years, and then he worked with me in the Valley Nutrition charity for 10 years, doing the ready-to-use food in Africa. And now we've teamed up again on this company to actually market the Aronia juice under the Chokeberry brand. And we're getting huge positive feedback. We're getting a lot of repurchase, people buying this juice, which at the moment is expensive because we're very small scale. But as we scale, I've got other farmers starting to grow the berries, and as it all scales, there's no reason these berries are expensive. They're very easy to grow, so it should come down. So I'm hopefully you will hear about it more in the future, and not under the Chokeberry name. Never going to be a seller.
If you have some Unilever experience there, a brand should be.
Oh yeah, of, you know? No. Well, we got the Chokeberry brand. It's got nice graphics and everything. Yeah. So yeah, that hopefully.
But so I suppose the reason I mention that is because, you know, I can't imagine a system where the powers that be in Irish agriculture turn around and say, all right, guys, let's all start growing Aronia berries because it's a new unheard of concept.
Yeah.
And it takes a different energy or a different force to kind of bring that in.
Yeah.
And that's maybe the potential for a kind of a grassroots, change to take hold. And I'm really curious about these other farmers that you've kind of touched on a couple of times. I mean, have you been able to demonstrate an alternative model to neighboring farmers and create a bit of a momentum behind it? Or do you find that there's, we're all a bit resistant to change or new ideas to some extent? Do you feel like people are, difficult to bring around to a new idea, presumably it means a whole new way of thinking and a way of organizing and a way of selling and, all of these kind of behavior changes that come with it. Are people kind of coming to you and showing that's what they want to do?
It's just starting. I've been very careful. It's not my job to go and preach to people.
Yeah.
I need to be sure it's working, and I need to be if we're one of the highest farms in Cork, high up on Chokeberry above Glengariff, very marginal land. If I can show it works there in terms of being economically viable, which we're on the point of, I think next year we're actually going to make a profit after salaries are paid on the farm without the grants. So once I can show that, then I'll be much more confident. I don't want to, you can't, until you're sure, you can't, you can't lead, unless you know where you're going, you can't lead.
Yeah.
But I'm certainly generating interest now. There's a lot of farmers coming, and there's some who started planting. And you've got to remember, it's the resistance to change in farming, and this is the same problem in Africa, is because farming is on the edge. If you try something new and it doesn't work, you're screwed. And it's so many. I mean, for years with NGO projects in Africa, you get these very well-meaning people who go out and start to try and tell farmers what they should be doing, never having picked up a hoe in an arid, semi-desert place in their lives. And farmers won't change. But the way we used to do it with Valid Nutrition, the charity, we used to go and say, well, you should be growing chickpea and sesame or soya. And they'll say, well, we don't eat it. We don't know about it. Why should you grow it? And we say, well, because we'll come back and we'll buy it from you at €2 a kilo. If you can create demand for the product, then people can see, ouch, it's viable to grow this thing. And so that's why it's a tricky promoting this change. You've got to balance demand generation with supply. And it's in the early phases, it's impossible. So what I've done with, say, the Aronia berries, I've linked up with a family farm in Poland who they've been growing Aronia in Poland for many years. So they produce organic Aronia berries. So when I run out of mine, which now with the demand is quite soon, my demand hardly meets the tip of it, then I import these berries and we press them in Tipperary, in the apple farm in Tipperary. And so we've got a product and we're creating demand, and then local farmers are seeing it on the shelves. They're seeing it on the shelves in specialist shops at the moment, but soon we've actually got one supermarket who had people asking for it, so they put it in their shelves. So they start to see this being sold, and they see, wow, it's not a cheap juice. And so then they think, well, actually, God, we've got plenty of marginal land, and this is what's happening. So I've had a few farmers come to me and said, can we talk about growing this? And I've got someone next week who should be coming. And so it's a slowly, bit by bit, trying to balance demand and supply. But you then ultimately you get to a critical point where then you can mechanise, because to make these low cost, you need enough farmers to justify an automatic harvester. Because at the moment, I can't even pick them for the price I can buy them in Poland. But as soon as you get to the scale of you're talking 10 hectares, then you can justify an automatic harvester. Then the price literally drops threefold. And so it's gathering steam, gathering momentum, and I'm hopeful in the next couple of years we'll get to that stage where suddenly the price can drop, and this could be a much bigger scale product. And for me, the holy grail of this is that I'm, as a nutritionist, working in nutrition, 35 years, I look at child diets in Ireland with real horror and sadness combined. The idea a treat is something sweet that you poison your child with, and the fizzy drinks high laden with this high fructose corn syrup, which is a metabolic poison. It's nothing more than it's just a metabolic poison. Whereas with Aronia juice, you can actually put it with sparkling water, and we've been trying with our children's friends, sort of 9 to 15-year-old young people in Ireland, and they like it. And so, God, if you could actually start to have a popular product that children will start to drink instead of the poison, which is fizzy drinks or even fruit juices, which are normally they're so high in sugar, orange juice, and actually have a really healthy drink when they're young, because that's when your body's programmed, and a lot of metabolic illness happens because of childhood programming. So if we could get to the stage where it was low cost enough for the average family in Ireland to afford it, and you could, it would be a really great thing.
It strikes me that whenever there's a solution to a big problem, it tends to, a very elegant solution solves multiple problems at the same time. And I think if you kind of create a vision of degraded land, mountaintops in rugged parts of Ireland, growing Aronia berries, growing blueberries, creating all kinds of positivity, economically, socially, but also in terms of health. And I feel like the one thing that gives me hope, I suppose, when you think about the horrors of climate change bearing down on us, is that I feel like if we fix it, it's sort of utopia or nothing. It's to some extent, we can't fix these problems and create other ones, because this is the mother of all problems. And this is sort of a microcosm of that, because you're talking about a new output, better livelihoods come with then healthier products that are popularized, that are more sustainable, that are better for the soil and the conditions that you're working with. So it's sort of winner takes all kind of proposition. So I kind of hang on to that myself to give myself a bit of sense of hope that if we get this, it's actually the prize is really great. But then juxtaposed against that, you've got you spoke earlier about during the panel discussion, seeing what you saw in Sudan in 2004, early warning systems of that cropping up in West Cork. So we're kind of in this world where things could go obviously terribly wrong very, very quickly, but if we fix it, things could be really, really positive on kind of in a multifaceted way. So how do you feel, when you are kind of exposed to, you've seen the worst of malnutrition in Africa, you have all these sort of potential solutions. Can we fix it? Do you feel hopeful or optimistic that we could have that kind of all-encompassing solution? Could that play out?
Whether ultimately we can fix it or not, I don't know. But we have to proceed as if we can fix it, because if we give up and say this is unfixable, then it's certainly not fixable. So I tend now, I've stopped really looking too much at international news and everything, because I know it's very depressing. And so I tend now just to focus on what we're doing. It's from being a sort of global nutritionist, looking at, I've worked in over 40 countries, I think, around Africa and even Asia. Now I'm focused on 1 square mile of mountain in West Cork, and I know I can fix that bit. And so at least the worst case scenario is I'm not part of the problem. I'm not one of the lemmings running off a cliff. The best case scenario is actually that's a solution that people see works, and people see that actually they can make a better living in a more environmentally sensitive way, and so they start to copy. And then the great thing, and that you get this incredibly healthy berries. Berries, if you want to eat berries, or listeners, if you want to eat anything good, eat berries. The anthocyanins, the polyphenols in them, they're just good. And so if we can increase the consumption of berries in Ireland, Irish grown berries, then that's great. So I proceed in my little micro environment, and hopefully it will have ripples. Even if it doesn't, at least I can sleep well at night knowing I'm not part of the problem, or trying not to be part of the problem at least.
You can create your own little slice of paradise there
in
West Cork.
Yeah. I mean, God, that's if that's the best or the worst it does, then it's fine.
Yeah. Thanks so much for talking to us and giving us some free blueberries and some free hope.
Well, thank you for the opportunity. I really appreciate it.
Cheers, Steve.
I've been lucky enough to know Steve Collins for about 15 years now, and he's still one of the most inspirational people I have ever met. Thanks for listening to this episode. We hope you enjoyed it, and please do join us next time for the next episode of Food Done Right.